ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لما تقولون ما لا تفعلون كبر مقتا عند الله أن تقولوا ما لا تفعلون. إن الله يحب الذين يقاتلون في سبيله صفا كأنهم بنيان مرصوص. وإذ قال موسى لقومه يا قوم لما تؤذونني وقد تعلمون أني رسول الله إليكم فلما زاغوا أزاغ الله قلوبهم والله لا يهدي القوم الفاسقين. وإذ قال عيسى ابن مريم يا بني إسرائيل إني رسول الله إليكم مصدقا لما بين يدي من التوراة ومبشرا برسول يأتي من بعد اسمه أحمد. فلما جاءهم بالبينات قالوا هذا سحر مبين ومن أظلم ممن افترى على الله الكذب وهو يدعى إلى الإسلام والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. يريدون ليطفئوا نور الله بأفواههم والله متم نوره ولو كره الكافرون. هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا هل أدلكم على تجارة تنجيكم من عذاب أليم تؤمنون بالله ورسوله وتجاهدون في سبيل الله بأموالكم وأنفسكم ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون. يغفر لكم ذنوبكم ويدخلكم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار ومساكن طيبة في جنات عدن ذلك الفوز العظيم. وأخرى تحبونها نصر من الله وفتح قريب وبشر المؤمنين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا أنصار الله كما قال عيسى ابن مريم للحواريين من أنصاري إلى الله قال الحواريون نحن أنصار الله فآمنت طائفة من بني إسرائيل وكفرت طائفة فأيدنا الذين آمنوا على عدوهم فأصبحوا ظاهرين. صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسوله الكريم. أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله والحمد حقه كما يستحقه حمدا كثيرا الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله اللهم لعن ولا ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك اللهم لعن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله اللهم لعنهم جميعا ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate you all on this firstly great occasion, an occasion that is mentioned by the 8th Holy Imam about this birth of this Imam, where he says هذا المولود الذي لم يولد في الإسلام مثله مولود أعظم بركة على شيعتنا منه. That this child that is born, Imam Al-Jawad, the narration is speaking about, that is the greatest, there is none in Islam, there is a greater blessing than the birth of this child. And this blessing is so great, although we see all the Anbiya, all the Awsiya, all the A'imma, the prophets, their successors, the Imams were all blessings upon us. However, in this case, there is no blessing greater than this. And before we delve into this discussion about the 9th Holy Imam, as to why his birth is considered such a blessing. We know when anytime we have a saying, anytime that God builds a house of prayer, the devil builds a chapel there. So anytime religion rises, anytime a prophet comes in, automatically you get the infighting. Because the shaitan, he doesn't work in a way where shaitan doesn't do a single hit. Shaitan is the worst, is a landlord's worst nightmare. Because once he occupies tenancy anywhere, he never leaves. In fact, it says he nests where he is and he lays eggs. And these eggs, this is what it says, they become into other things. Like you see someone, for example, they begin as a thief and later they become a murderer. That's why in criminology and if you look at the police, they always look at when a big crime's been committed, they look for people with priors. So look, this person didn't just become like this overnight. So the shaitan enters and he starts to work within, trying to get amongst them. Because you know, in Islam, there's a lot of vetting. Allah vets and He vets until we're left with what's the purest. And this is what happens, and groups come out. After the martyrdom of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, and it was certain by then there was two groups. Those that were followers of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam, and those that followed the kings. Now, through the followers of Ahl al-Bayt, the splinter groups began. And they didn't begin until the time of the 6th Holy Imam, Al-Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq alayhi salam. And the first splinter group that arrived then, as we go through the Imams, there was a son of the 4th Imam, Imam Zayn al-Abidin. He had 15 children. Of his children, he had a son called Zayd. Zayd rose against the authorities, and Zayd was martyred. We call him Zayd al-Shaheed. So a group arose at this time. They said he was revolutionary. and he was a fighter, thus he is the Imam. So after Imam Hussein, alayhi salam, there is Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein, and then there is Zayd. And that's the Imam. And they're called what? We call these people Zaydis. This was the first splinter group. And they said this is where the Imamate ends. It ends with Zayd. So there they had the five. These were called fivers because they believed in this many Imams. It didn't finish there. Another group would rise. After the martyrdom of Imam al-Sadiq, and this group were called the Ismailis. A lot of people that branched off them are the Bohras that you have in India, you have the Druze in Lebanon and Syria, they're all branches from the Ismailis. The Ismailis, in their beliefs, they believed Ismail, the son of Imam al-Sadiq, was the seventh Imam. How? Because we have hadith that says the eldest of the Imam's children is the Imam. However, this narration was made after the seventh Imam. This narration wasn't before the seventh Imam. So some of the fuqaha say that this narration is in line with those after the seventh Imam. Others say no. They say it is the eldest, but it couldn't be Ismail because Ismail died during the time of Imam al-Sadiq. So there's no Imam after Imam al-Sadiq then, if Ismail was the Imam. So these people that followed him were called Ismailis. After this, another group came about. Okay? And they were called Al-Fatahiyya. The Fatahiyya, they're not that common, that's why you never hear it. These were the people that followed Abdullah al-Aftah. See, Imam al-Sadiq's eldest son was Ismail. His second eldest son was who? Abdullah al-Aftah. He had a few daughters, then he had Musa ibn Ja'far. And look at the test, how big it is. Because Abdullah and Ismail were the sons of free women. Imam al-Qadim was the son of a slave woman. She was a bondsmaid, just like Ismail is mentioned to be the son of a bondsmaid. So this is how the trial works. So Musa ibn Ja'far was the third eldest child of Imam al-Sadiq. So the second son, Abdullah al-Aftah, they called him al-Aftah. Well, generally Aftah is someone that has a big head. Someone that has a broad head, they call him Aftah. Or they have a broad nose, they call him Aftah. Or in this case, some say his legs were abnormally broad, so they called him Aftah. Now, of the characteristics of the Imam is they don't have any defects. Doesn't mean if I have defects, something is wrong with me. No. The Imam is supposed to be perfect in creation, to be an example for people. So he's supposed to be a standard example. So this is one of the reasons that the people knew that he wasn't the Imam. The other reason, the eldest, I said, hadn't been mentioned till after the seventh holy Imam. So the people that followed him, there was a big reason that they followed him. They said he's the eldest, and he was the one that pushed the movement. Abdullah al-Aftah actually came out and said, I am the Imam. So he came out and said, I'm the Imam after my father. So Imam al-Qadim said, okay, come sit down and sit in the place of your father and be the Imam. I'll answer the questions that the people have. So the people came with their questions. Abdullah got up and left because he was in his position. And 70 days after the death of the Imam, Abdullah al-Aftah died. And Imam al-Qadim was there. But then came a splinter group, and up till today, this is the most dangerous splinter group. And this splinter group, when I say it's a danger towards the religion, this splinter group was the splinter group that believed that the seventh holy Imam was the Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That the seventh holy Imam was the final Imam. That they said there's 7 Imams and this Imam is gone into occultation. There was a reason for this. A lot of people asked, why? Why would they say this? You know how sometimes you have a wakil, you have someone representing you in a village, you send them someone, you know, what are they called? A delegate of some sort, a rep of some sort. Someone, you come up, for example, say you're the Sheikh in this city, you go up to the marja, you say, can I have a paper that gives me permission to collect the hummus from the people? And the marja will give you this if you are someone that is of good character. And that's what they go by. The imams act on for this, and this position, they act on umur zahariya, which means they act on apparent issues. They don't act upon hidden issues. So of the people that he had as wukala, one of them, his name was Ali ibn Hamza al-Bata'ini, and the other one was Ziyad ibn Marwan al-Qundi. These two men were representatives of the Imam. When the Imam was imprisoned, they were collecting amwal for him. Ali ibn Hamza al-Bata'ini had collected, how much do you think he's collected? He'd collected 30,000 dinars. If you were to calculate in today's terms, he had over 100 kilos of gold. Do you imagine? This guy has collected over 100 kilos of gold. Now you calculate that. How much is a kilo of gold worth today? $70,000? About that? So he had over $7 million with him. So what he and Ziyad ibn Marwan al-Qundi decided to do, they came up, they conjured the idea that the Imam was not killed in prison when the Imam was killed. And they said that the Imam has been raised to the heavens. And they made it very believable for the people to let it go. They said he will return in 6 months. So in 6 months he will come back and then everything will be sorted. So everyone said, all right, 6 months, we'll wait. By then, they worked with the money the way they wanted and dealt with it in the way that they wanted. 6 months passed by, and then they said, it looks like a prolonged ghaiba, a prolonged occultation. They took the money. In fact, they were explicitly cursed by the A'immah alayhum salam. So this is what was around at the time. And why do I mention these? Because they had an argument that Imam al-Ridha was not the Imam. Why? Because Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam was without child. Over 40 years old and no child. And this is the barakah, the blessing of Imam Al-Jawad. And the importance is, firstly, he reinforced the imamat of the 8th Imam. How did he reinforce the imamat of his father? Because it was essential for the Imam to have a child. In one narration where Al-Husayn ibn Yasar comes up to Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam and he asks him a question. The Imam is still without child. He says to him, تَخْلُ الْأَرْضُ مِنْ أَنْ يَكُونَ فِيهَا إِمَامٌ. You know, will the earth ever be empty of an Imam? Will it ever be vacant of an Imam? And the Imam al-Ridha said, La, no. Then he said, فَيَكُونُ فِيهَا اثْنَانٌ. Is there two Imams? Is it possible that there's two Imams at one time? The Imam said, La, إِلَّا وَأَحَدُهُمَا صَامِتٌ لَا يَتَكَلَّمُ. In other words, yes, there may be more than one Imam at once. However, the one that isn't the Imam doesn't speak. In other words, and you see this in narrations where people used to enter and ask Amir al-Mu'mineen a question, and he will say, I'm in the presence of Rasulullah. Ask Rasulullah the question. Rasulullah is in that position. Unless the Prophet commanded him to speak. Otherwise, the imamat, when one Imam is present, he is the Imam, he is the commander, and the other Imam is his subject, even though he is the next Imam. Then the man, Husayn ibn Yasar, said, فَقَدْ عَلِمْتُ أَنَّكَ لَسْتَ بِإِمَامٍ. He says to Imam al-Ridha, I know that you're not the Imam. And the Imam says to him, وَمِنْ أَيْنَ عَلِمْتُ? How did you know I'm not the Imam? He said, إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ لَكَ وَلَدٌ وَإِنَّمَا فِي الْعَقِبِ. that he said, you don't have a child, and the imamat is sequential. And it comes from father to son. And the fact that you have no son, that means you're not the imam. So then the imam says to him, فوالله لا تمضي الأيام والليالي حتى يولد لي ذكر من صلبي يقوم مثلي مقامي يحق الحق ويمحق الباطل. So the imam informs him, the days and nights will not pass except from me will come a child that will have my position. He's the one that will remove. In other words, when he says yamhaqul batil, this imam, in fact, removed. His whole life was about removing dubious things, suspicious things, removing doubts from the beginning of his life, although it was short life, 25 years to the end of his life. His life was all about removing suspicions and reviving the remembrance of the remaining imams. Even to the point where one person would question when they saw Imam Al-Jawad and they saw him with Imam Al-Rida, and the Imam says to him, the man says to the Imam, ما حاجتكم إلى ذلك. The man asks him about something with regard, he says, ذكرنا عند أبي الحسن شيئا بعدما ولد له أبو جعفر. They were asking with regard to some affair, some issue after Abu Ja'far was born, after Imam Al-Jawad was born. And then the Imam says, ما حاجتكم إلى ذلك. What is your need for this? هذا أبو جعفر قد أجلسته مجلسي وصيرته في مكاني. In other words, he's reminding them that this is the Imam. Obviously, the affair that we're asking about is what happens next. He says, this is the Imam after me. Because there was doubt about this. So Allah Azza wa Jal would show furthermore how this happens. Firstly, his birth reinforced the legitimacy of the eighth Imam and the arguments against him, and it removed these suspicions. Secondly, there were several events that would show his position. One event that's narrated by a Zaydi, who was a Zaydi, his name is Al-Qasim ibn Abd al-Rahman. He sees a commotion, he sees people, he says in the narration, he sees people running like in groups, they're running towards a place, like there's someone there and they're all surrounding him. So he asked the people running, what's the rush, what's the hurry, what's going on? They said, we're going, over there is Ibn al-Rida. You know, this is our Imam, we're there to follow him. So he says he got up on his mule and he said, and he rode towards to see what's going on. When he looked in that direction, he said, he looked at the way and he saw he was very young. He saw this child and what are these people, what's all this commotion around this child? He said, لعن Allah, in his head. He said, لعن الله أصحاب الأئمة. He said, لعن, because he's a Zaydi. He said, لعن الله أصحاب الإمامة. حيث يقولون إن الله افترض طاعته. That they say that these people, may God curse them, that they say you have to obey this person. This child sitting there, have to obey him. He says to him, when he said this, he says, the Imam looked up towards him in his direction. And he said to him, Ya Qasim ibn Abd al-Rahman. Firstly, this is the first part of the miracle, he knew who he was. Remember, this man had no idea and just followed the group. He said, Ya Qasim ibn Abd al-Rahman. He says to him, and a verse in the Quran, أَبَشَرًا مِنَّا وَاحِدًا نَتَّبِعُهُ إِنَّا إِذًا لَفِي ضَلَالٍ وَصُعُرٍ. That this is a verse in the Quran when it mentions about a prophet, about Rasulullah. He says, أَبَشَرًا مِثْلُ, because people used to say, is he a mortal, a human like us, that we should, from among us, should we follow him? You know, most surely, he says, most surely in this case, we would be in error and distress if we follow such a person. The Imam read this verse to Qasim ibn Abd al-Rahman. So then, do you know what he says? Even then he says, I didn't believe. He says, within myself, he says, this has got to be some kind of sorcery. He says, فَقُلْتُ فِي نَفْسِي سَاحِرٌ وَاللَّهِ. This is sorcery. How he knew who I was, the verse. And then the Imam continues with the next verse. He says, he looks towards me and he says, because what he says immediately, he says, أُلْقِيَ الذِّكْرُ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ بَيْنِنَا بَلْ هُوَ كَذَّابٌ أَشِرٌ. He says, has the message been sent down upon him from among us? Rather, he is an insolent liar. So firstly, at this point, he says this. He says, when the Imam says this to me, because there's too many people there, but he said, I left, and from that point, I became a believer in the Imam alayhim salam. I became an Imami instead of a Zaydi. Now, this is with regard to reinforcing the imamat of his father, Imam al-Rida, and reinforcing his imamat. What about the Imams after him? What suspicions and what doubts did he remove in this case? Firstly, Allah Azza wa Jal shows throughout the Quran and throughout history the ability of Allah giving authority to whomsoever He pleases. In the case of Isa ibn Maryam, alayhim as-salam, Allah Azza wa Jal allows Isa to speak in the crib while he is still an infant and mention to the people, I am a servant of God. Allah has given me the book. Allah has given me wisdom. And He gives him his task from that age. Now you are there to announce. So Allah Azza wa Jalla says there's no discrimination here. Likewise, when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam calls his ashira, the near ones, the aqrabin of the ashira, the near ones, and he makes the dinner with the shoulder of lamb. How old is Amir al-Mu'mineen at this point? He's 9 years old. He's 9 years old, and the Prophet says, who will be my vicegerent in this affair? Who will be my support? Who will be my aid? Amir al-Mu'mineen says, me, and he says, Ya Ali, you are my successor. You are my vicegerent. You are the executor of my will. You are. He gives him this authority while he is 9 years old. So this is something that was apparent beforehand. Yet people still did not accept this. Now the Imam was born in 195 after Hijrah. He assumed his imamat at 203 after Hijrah. He was only 8 years old. So what happened is Ma'mun al-Abbasi, he brought Imam, after he had poisoned Imam al-Rida, he brought Imam al-Jawad close to him. He said to Imam al-Jawad, I want you to marry my daughter al-Fadl. And just to let you know, this wasn't the first time he'd done this. He had married one of his daughters to Imam al-Rida. And then he married the next daughter to his son, Imam al-Jawad. Now when he wanted to do this, the Abbasin got up, because the king is not there by himself. He has these close people around him that are also from Banu al-Abbas. They're all eating pieces of the pie. They said, listen, we've been down this road before. Last time you got us someone from the family of Abu Talib, and you finally got rid of him. Now you're bringing another one? And he said to them, and this is what the narrations say, that the story, historical, this is not an Ahl al-Bayt, so it's whatever the historical text has said, says that he turned around and said, hold on, they're our cousins, and the Prophet has ordered us bisilat al-arham, and we're supposed to be one, we're together. And they said, listen, away with this talk. And here they are, you say this to someone else, not to us. Why do you want him? He's not even knowledgeable. How would he know what to do? And this is where Ma'mun knew that he had the advantage. He said, bring anyone to question him. He is more knowledgeable than you and I. So this is where they introduce who? They introduce a qadi known as Yahya ibn Aktham. Yahya ibn Aktham was a Hanbali. The Hanabil, They, even today, the Hanbalis in Iraq right now, before they, how they were killing a lot of ISIS and that, a lot of them were from this region. Before they were killing us, they were killing the Shafi'is. So they've always been people that were against the other Sunni sects. Anyway, but this man, Yahya ibn Aktham, was very cunning. How was he cunning? If he went to debate anyone, if he knew an alim was strong in a subject, say an alim was strong in usul, he would ask him a question in fiqh. If he knew an alim was strong in nahu, he would ask him a question in aqa'id. He would never ask you a question in your field. And they even came to a point where he bought someone and forward another alim from the same, but this one was a Shafi'i. So he bought this Shafi'i to put him on show. And he was a qadi, he was a big judge. He was at first a judge in Basra, and Ma'mun brought him towards Maru to make him qadi al-qudat. He became the supreme judge there. So when he brought him in, and there was a guy, a Shafi'i there, in one of his discussions with the Shafi'i, he asked the Shafi'i a question in history or nahu or something like that, and this Shafi'i was strong in hadith. So the Shafi'i said to him, listen, what do you say if I tell you there is a hadith, an fulan, all the way he says, an Ali ibn Abi Talib. And there's a reason for this. He says, قال لو كان ينبغي أحد أن يرجم مرتين لرجم اللوطي. He says, if anyone deserved to be stoned twice, it would be the Sodomite. The Sodomite deserves to be stoned twice, if there was anyone to be. So when he said that to him, Yahya ibn Aktham went quiet. He didn't say a word, because there was a secret that this guy was about to reveal. The reason is, if you actually research, like Pope Paul II, who died doing his favorite pastime, Yahya ibn Aktham was into the Bachabazi. He was into that. If you actually look him up, he's got a history of this. He was into this having relationships with younger boys. So obviously he wasn't a pitcher, because of the narration that threw him off. Says a lot about what he was. Now when they bring Yahya ibn Aktham to question the Imam, Yahya ibn Aktham is going to use this same method of questioning and trickery. See, firstly, when he asked the question, this is a story you all know, you hear it every year, with regard to the Hajj. Firstly, the Hajj isn't something you study unless you're going to the Hajj. You pick up Risala al-Amaliyya, it has no Kitab al-Hajj. In fact, if you start studying in the Hawza, it isn't until you start with the Sutuh, when you're doing the Muqaddamat, you're not going to study Bab al-Hajj, and even then you're not going to delve into it. And also the question he asks is a loaded question. Why? He set it up to do follow-up questions. That's what his intention is. So he says to the Imam, what is the ruling for somebody that hunts in Hajj and he kills? Like he hunts a kill and he is muhrim. He's wearing ihram. So then the Imam responds to that question with multiple questions. He says, is this person young or is he old? Is he knowledgeable of what he's doing? Is he ignorant? Is his ihram of Umrah or Hajj? Is it a large animal? Is it a small animal? Is it a flying animal? Is it a land animal? Is he determined to do it again? Or is he remorseful? Is it the first time or is he done? He gives him all these different scenarios. Yahya ibn Aktham goes silent because he's already answered him to the extent of in other words, I've unraveled what your game is. I'm not going to fall into your trap. I'm going to give you the response that is required. So when he does this, the Ma'mun turns around and he offers the Imam what the mahr is for his daughter. And he says, I marry you, my daughter, on these conditions. And Imam Al-Jawad accepts the marriage. And he marries her. At this point, the Imam, you need to remember, when you think about this, is a aqd being made with a child. The Imam is how old? The Imam's 9 years old in this issue. So he's being forced. In fact, you know by the answer, he says, قَبِلْتُ يَا أَمِيرَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. He calls him Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is the position that he's in to respond. The Ma'mun is the ruler, and they have to do what the ruler wants. So then after this, after he has done this aqd between them and married them, then Ma'mun is still not trusting with the Imam. He said, so tell me, what is the ruling for every single scenario you have given? And then the Imam starts to explain in each one, it's a long narration. Then the Ma'mun hasn't finished there. He says, now you ask Yahya a question. Ask him a question. And the Imam says, shall I ask you a question? Now Yahya doesn't want to be asked a question. He's already been slapped in the face, but he can't say no. He said, yeah, you can ask me. And obviously, this question, if you ask us, we all know the answer. Why? Because we read the narration. But if you ask someone that doesn't or hasn't heard the narration, they won't be able to respond to it. I don't care who they are. If they have not read the narration, they won't have the response to this. The Imam says to him, what do you say about a man who has a woman that is not his mahram in the dawn, and by the day she becomes his mahram? And before the Dhuhr, she's not his mahram. But after the Dhuhr, she becomes his mahram. And before the Asr, she's not his mahram. But after the Asr, she becomes his mahram. And before the Maghrib, she's not his mahram. But after the Maghrib, she becomes his mahram. And before the Isha, she's not his mahram. But after Isha, she becomes his mahram. Round about, the times are wrong, but I'm spreading it throughout the day. But look how many scenarios. Halal alayk, haram alayk, halal alayk, haram alayk. 3 in one day. Who can answer this? Who can possibly answer this unless they've read the narration? So they all are silenced and they say, all right, tell us what is the response. And the Imam says that the girl is a slave girl belonging to another person. So she is not his mahram. Then he purchases her. And she becomes his slave, so she becomes his mahram. Then he frees her, she no longer becomes his mahram. Then he marries her, she becomes his mahram. ثم يتظاهر عليها. In Surah Al-Mujadila, you'll see this. Yatadhahar used to be where a man would say to his wife, you are now like my mother. That basically, yatadhahar means he gives her his back. That you are now no longer my wife, you are like my mother. This, if you do this, you need to do a kafara before your wife becomes haram on you. Before she becomes halal on you, you need to do a kafara. So yatadhahar alayha, she becomes haram on him. He does this dihar, she becomes, and then he expiates for it, she becomes halal on him again. Then he divorces her, she becomes haram on him. Then he returns her, she becomes halal on him. So look, this is all in one day. To give you all these ahkam, just to put them in a position, at this young age, his capability. What is he trying to show? He's trying to show Imam al-Hadi will come after me, he will be a young Imam. Imam al-Hujjah, Sahib al-Amr will come after me, and he will be an Imam. And here's the final narration that I'm going to use, and we'll end with this. That one man comes up to the Imam, and this man is a man that you all know. Anyone that's been to Iran knows this man, and this man is Abd al-Azim al-Hassani. Whoever's been to Iran and visited his shrine, Abd al-Azim and Abdullah al-Hassani, because he's from the posterity of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam. So this isn't an ordinary person talking to Imam al-Jawad. He says, قُلْتُ لِمُحَمَّدَ بْنُ عَلِيِّ بْنَ مُوسَى إِنِّي لَأَرْجُوكَ أَن تَكُونَ الْقَائِمِ. He says, I hope and I wish that you are the qa'im, the one that will rise. He says to him, why? He says, من أهل بيت محمد الذي يملأ الأرض قسطا وعدلا كما ملئت جورا. I want you to be وظلمة. He says, I want you to be that one that will restore justice after, because could you imagine what the world was like at that time? as well. So then he says to Abdul Azim, Imam Al-Jawad, he says, Ya Abul Qasim, ma minna illa qa'imun bi amrillah. All of us in the Ahl al-Bayt are all in the position where we are, we're in that position where we rise by the command of Allah. Okay, and he says, wahadin ila dinillah, and we are those that guide to the religion of Allah. He says, walakin al-qa'im الذي يطهر الله عز وجل به الأرض من أهل الكفر والجحود ويملأها عدلا وقسطا. That Allah Azza wa Jal will purify the earth, this whole earth will be purified of disbelief, all forms of atheism, all forms of disbelief, anything that you see that is foreign, pretty much everything you're seeing these days, the Imam will purify. Then he says in this, هو الذي يخفى على الناس ولادته. His birth will be secretive. He says, from people will not be able to see this. وَيَغِيبُ عَنْهُمْ شَخْصُ, and he will be in occultation. I'm with you, in other words. وَيَحْرِمُ عَلَيْهِمْ تَسْمِيَتُهُ. He's someone that is forbidden to mention him by name. Notice we always call him Al-Imam, Al-Mahdi, or Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan. No one calls him by his name. وَهُوَ سَمِيُّ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ. He has the name of Rasulullah, and he says وَكَنِيُّهُ. He has the same kunya, as in Abul Qasim, as him. And then he mentions that this Imam, when he mentions about him, he says that this Imam is the one that will have, he says, the same number of people, he says, as Badr, 313. He'll have 313 men with him. رَجُلًا مِنْ أَقَاصِ الْأَرْضِ, from all over the earth. Now here's a question here. A lot of people always mention this point. Is that all the Imam will have? 313 men. Now Ashab Badr wasn't 313 in number, incomplete. There was 313 elite. They were the commanders. But the narrations say the believers will flock from all over the land. But there were 313 above them all. And they're not the people that have got 313 tattooed on themselves, It's 313. It's you get chosen, you don't choose it yourself. You're chosen by Allah Azza wa Jal for this task. Then he says, he mentions after he says this, he says, وَذَلِكَ قَوْلُ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ أَيْنَمَا تَكُونُوا يَأْتِي بِكُمُ اللَّهُ جَمِيعًا إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Wherever you are, Allah will bring you all forth. This is with regard to Imam al-Hujjah. فإذا اجتمعت له هذه العدة من أهل الإخلاص أظهر أمره فإذا أكمل له العقد وهي 10,000 رجل خرج بإذن الله. So what happens is these 313 begin, and then he gets to he says 10,000 men, and then he says this is when the Imam will come out. فلا يزال, he says, يقتل أعداء الله حتى يرضى الله تبارك وتعالى. So he will continue to fight and kill the enemies of God. All these people that you see, and the Imam is giving him the good news of what will happen to all the enemies of Allah Azza wa Jal. So then Abdul Azim said, Ya Sayyidi, وَكَيْفَ يَعْلَمُ أَنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ رَضِيَ قال عفوا أن الله قد رضي قال يلقي في قلبه الرحمة والحديث بتمامه. So the Imam's first prophesizing about who? The 12th Imam. So he's firstly reinforcing that this Imam will also be young. How do you know who he is? The same thing goes back to, how do I know what are the signs of who the Imam is? Of the signs is the Imam has the knowledge. As Imam Al-Jawad in this case has been someone that showed his knowledge and reinforced his imamah and the imamah of those to come. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal on this night to bless us all on this night where we celebrate the birth of the Imam, and grant us the opportunity to visit his grave in Baghdad and Al-Qadhimiyya, and to grant us his intercession on the day of judgment. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. We ask Allah to hasten the reappearance of our master Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Mehdi. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma qul li waliyika صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوى وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات وإلى أرواح موتاكم جميعا وروح عبد الحسين زهور رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة مسبوقة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا المحمود الأحمد أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. أما بعد، السلام عليكم أيها الحفل الكريم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أسعد الله أيامنا وأيامكم بذكرى ميلاد الإمام محمد الجواد عليه أفضل الصلاة والسلام، سائلين المولى عز وجل أن يعطينا من جوده في الدنيا وفي الآخرة بفضل الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. طلع البدر بميلاد الجواد، ونسيم الخير حب للعباد، ابن مولانا الرضا أهلا به، ابن مولانا الرضا أهلا به، ابن زمزم والصفا نور الرشاد، عطر الكون سليل المصطفى، وهو باب للهدى باب المراد، غرد الوحي بآيات الهدى، غرد الوحي بآيات الهدى، نزل الغيث أفاض بالبلاد، وكذا الجود أفاض للورى، معدن الخير ونبراس السداد، فاطمي حيدري جوده، بقدوم الخير مولانا الجواد. هاي الصلوات ما مقبولة من هذا الجمع. This is the second event where there's people allowed. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. ها خوتي ها، دق باب الكرم والجود، لحظة ينفتح لك باب، حاج ابن الرضا واسأل هذا الماير الطلاب، حلف بعمته زينب نعم الولي والأرباب، وبجاهه يقضيها الباري، وبجاهه يقضيها الباري، وبجاهه. You've all become Iraqis after this. يقضيها الباري وبجاهه. يا تاسع اليمة يا رحمة ميلادك ضوى، يا تاسع اليمة يا رحمة ميلادك ضوى، يا فرحة العترة والزهرة اشتمك هوى، نور نبوي نور علوي نور نبوي نور، نور نبوي نور. يا إمام الرحمة تاسع أوصياء من سلالة فاطمة وختم أنبياء، ونفرض حبه وفخر نحمل ولاء، نسأل الباري تعالى من عطاء، نسأل الباري تعالى من عطاء، باب الكرم والجود بحر الزود يشبه حيدر، باب الكرم والجود بحر الزود يشبه حيدر، يا محلى أعياده ميلاده فايض كوثر، نور نبوي نور علوي نور، نور نبوي نور. أرض المدينة معطرة وبيوت الأطهار، ابن الرضا نور سطع نور الأقطار، والحرم بارك مولده للنبي المختار، والنجف يا محلى النجف موطن الكرار، والنجف يا محلى النجف موطن الكرار، كربلاء فرحانة ويانا وتطش الزهور، كربلاء فرحانة ويانا وتطش الزهور، نهنى ابو السجاد بالميلاد ونهني الحضور، نور نبوي نور علوي نور، نور نبوي نور. ما خاب بد كل من قصد له وتعنى، كل الأماني والفرح ينبابه تلقاه، كل الأماني والفرح ينبابه تلقاه، ابن الرضا باب الكرم دق بابه وانخاه، ينبابه اطلب حاجتك مقضية والله، ينبابه اطلب حاجتك مقضية والله، مثل القمر عباس كل الناس تقصد للصحن، مثل القمر عباس كل الناس تقصد للصحن، جاه الجواد تريد بهالعيد تنزل المحن، نور نبوي نور نبوي نور علوي نور. من كربلاء نهدي الرضا أجمل تحيات، نهدي لأبو الزهرة وعلي أعلى صلوات، صلوات من كربلاء نهدي الرضا أجمل تحيات، نهدي لأبو الزهرة وعلي أعلى صلوات، للمهدي ندعي للفرج صبح الفرج آت، إحنا مع العترة نظل ما نمل هيها، إحنا مع العترة نظل ما نمل هلها، يا العترة وياكم نهواكم أبواب الهدى، يا العترة وياكم نهواكم أبواب الهدى، حبكم عذب صافي مو خافي وبرغم العدا، نور نبوي نور علوي نور، علوي المعجزاتك شاهدة نور وعلامة، تاريخك الطاهر يشع سور الإمامة، تاريخك الطاهر يشع سور الإمامة، هذا قدومك شيعتك نالت كرامة، واللي اعتناه لحضرتك حصل مرامة، مدحك إلي وانسى بالخمسة أصحاب الكسى، مدحك إلي وانسى بالخمسة أصحاب الكسى، مولاي لا تردني وتودني يا جود وعطا، نور نبوي نور نور علوي صلوات. حي شيعة علي الكرار حيهم، حيهم أنوار المشرقة نورت، حيهم مليون الفرح مع لميتهم، حيهم بفضل ميلاد بين خير البرية صلوات. ها خوتي ها اجا حاتم يجدي يم ابو الهادي، يقل بالرضا انطيني مرادي، ترى خيرك كثير ويترس الوادي، وقطرة من جودك تغنيني قطرة ومن جودك، تغنيني قطرة ومن جودك. We need immediate translation. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. صلوا يا خير العباد الليلة ميلاد الجواد، صلوا يا خير العباد جواد، صلوا يا خير العباد الليلة ميلاد الجواد، صلوا يا وصلوا يا خير العباد اللي لميلاد الجواد صلوات. من الزغر يا علي واجبا حبكم علي، من الزغر يا علي واجبا حبكم علي، والقاعدة تفترض كل من يحبكم علي، وتلقاه بيوم الحشر واقف بظل علي، والناس تنظر إلى من ساطع حسن، ويبشر المصطفى ويحشر ويل حسن، هذا العشق حيدر بالحشر صيته حسن، وبالحشر أنا اندبك يا أبا الحسن يا علي. Should we wait until next event and continue? Thursday inshallah. Sheikh Mohammed, do you want us to read the final section? لو نصلي الصلاة من هسه. Do you want to get it? I've got a lot, but the energy is fading. All that ATP that everyone's put into the موفقين إن شاء الله. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. نثرت لمولدك الشريف زهورا، بل أنت من طه الرسول عطورا، بل أنت من طه الرسول عطورا، ابن الرضا بجماله قمر الهدى، ابن الرضا بجماله قمر الهدى، للنشأتين مباهجا وسرورا، ابن المعاجز للبرية فرقدا، لا زال في حق الكرامة نورا، لا زال في جو الكرامة نورا، هذا الجواد وجوده نبراسنا، نبراسنا، نبراسنا أناسنا للعاشقين مناله موفورا، إني عشقتك تاسع الأطهار، أملي شرابا من يديك طهورا. صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الليل يفوح بعطوره وردنا الليل يفوح بعطوره، وردنا الجواد اليوم من بابه، ردنا نحيي ميلاده، وردنا نهني والده وكل البرية صلوات. ها خوتي ها اقصد للجواد وشوف هذا الشاعة علومه، ابن الرضا والنعمين صاحب غيرة من يومه، تدري ايش قد يحب زينب ويحب عمته معصومة. وها خوتي ها يلا شيخ علي، ها خوتي ها خوتي ها وبزينب حلفة ومعصومة، وبزينب حلفة وبزينب حلفة ومعصومة صلوات. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الآن حان وقت السوالف. Time for a little chit chat. طبعا تقبل الله منا ومنكم صالح الأعمال، ولأمواتكم وأموات السامعين والجالسين وأموات المؤسسين، ولا سيما روح الشاب عبد الحسين زهور. نهدي ثواب حفلنا هذا وثواب سورة المباركة الفاتحة، تسبقها صلاة على محمد وآل محمد.